A question I'm often asked in relation to radio drama is, how should I lay it out? It's important for writers of scripted drama that their work is clear, and that those who need to use the script, actors, sound designers, editors and directors, all understand what they should do with it. Now, in today's discussion with novelist, short story writer and writing coach Rachel Knightley and novelist and audio drama writer Emily Inkpen, we'll be looking at the art of laying out your writing. Welcome to The Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Rachel and Emily, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So you have both done quite a lot of laying out of your writing, and we're going to be picking your brains today for some examples of, work that you've done in that area. But Rachel, I want to start with you and just to think really about, when does the act of laying out your writing begin?
For me, it comes absolutely first with approaching the page and approaching the idea. I've always found it so useful to be able to see it as somebody reading it will see it, not necessarily as book form, but as the piece that I am going to hand into the editor or whoever it happens to be that I'm handing it into. It's absolutely helpful to me that what I see on the page resembles the psychology of what I'm seeing in my head as closely as possible. So for me, it's absolutely a part of the creative process, the thinking process. It's me arriving in the world.
And Emily, are you the same? Are you trying to make your work pretty from first laying it down?
I am the opposite. I open page, start writing, and normally it's Arial font and 11 size, and I just crack on. And I know that there are some people who spend I sort of equate it to spending a lot of time at the beginning of a game, an RPG, building your character before you get going. And I know that some people really think about font and everything before they dive into that process, whereas I do spend a lot of time working on my character at the beginning of a game. Oh my god, Baldur's Gate, I was there for over an hour choosing boob size. But when it comes to getting started writing, sorry, you're making me laugh there.
You're making me laugh.
When it comes to getting started with writing.
Emily said boobs.
I did say boobs. In Baldur's Gate, you can choose your vulva too. Did you know that?
I did not know you could choose your vulva, no.
No, you can. Or your penis. If you are
so
democratic.
You don't lay it out in a pretty way.
I do
penises?
It's out in a pretty way. No, I just crack on. It's ugly until it isn't, and yeah.
Yeah.
So you've used the term psychology already, Rachel. Is it for you then that there is a beauty to the look of what you're creating, and that is important to you right from the outset?
It's never been about beauty, it's more been about utility, that if I see things on the page and it's all kind of chunky and single-spaced, I find it much more impenetrable, which is not a joke on what you just said at all, but that is what it feels like. Oh God, that sounds worse. Anyway, yeah, we're going to go down that route.
This is all going terribly well, isn't it?
Yeah, feel free to remove this
I'm not editing a thing from
as
this.
the actress said to the bishop. Anyway, I think there was a question a few hours ago. I think your question was about... Oh, sorry, I am giggling. Okay. I see it more clearly if it's not all bunched together in single space. If it's already double spaced, already in a font that I find it comfortable to think in, then what happens and the... Really, for me, actually, it's about what happens and the time in which it happens. I can see the time elapsing when I've got proper formatting. I can feel the scene progressing. And that allows me to do other things more instinctively, intuitively, more easily. One of which is something I talk about is that you carry the introspection by the action.
Yes.
And I see that as being like a carrier bag, that it doesn't matter how great all the introspection is. If you've got too much of it in there, the carrier bag is going to break. Just like if you went to the supermarket, it wouldn't matter how much you needed or loved all of those things you were trying to buy. If you put too many things in one bag, the bag breaks. And if I formatted well from the get-go, I find it much easier to sense that. And although I'm a big fan of the vomit draft, as you know, get it all down there to start with, even then, even in that first draft stage, I find my instincts are sharper about what I want it to be like. And that's particularly true for dialogue, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. But being able to see the characters and move the camera like that. We're in this paragraph, viewpoint characters talking, so we get their thoughts that they're not sharing. We get their physical sensations. We get the words we're using. We're then, camera, if you like, moves to non-viewpoint character. We get their facial expressions. We get their body language. We don't get their thoughts because we're not psychic, but we can see it very easily because we've moved the camera in that way. I just find that phenomenally clarifying and helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because, I always start with double spacing as well. It's like, you need the breath between the lines. Like, if it's too close, it can't breathe. It's like it's too claustrophobic on the page. Like the spacing needs to be,
It is, it's space and time. That is what formatting is for me. And it's so interesting that both of us, thinking we were coming from the opposite perspective, are kind of taking as granted at some level, do your double spacing, dude.
You got it, yeah, that one goes without saying.
Well, I wanted to ask about this because I'm sure that double spacing on manuscripts probably went back to the days when you typed your manuscript, double spaced it so that an editor with an actual pen could write notes between lines. But we still do that in drafting, don't we? Why do you think that is? Is it just to
space, man?
Make it breathe, as it were?
But the thing about making it breathe is by saying that we're realising it's not just having space, it's also having time. You can see how time elapses through your work, what it's like for the characters, what it's like for the reader, in a way you don't if it's all bunched and screwed together in a lump. Yeah. Well,
Emily, let's turn to you. And obviously you flicked between the worlds of scripted writing and prose. When you're writing a script, are you laying that out in script format from the get-go, or does that happen later?
Oh, that happens later.
Okay.
I think I should say up front that there is a certain amount of formatting that happens. Things need to be consistent even at the draft stage. The number of tabs between the name of the character and where their line starts, how many tabs there are between the margin and where you put a stage direction, for instance. That all needs to be consistent. But we're not talking about making sure that the speech is in a narrower column to the margins, which are in and all of those things, which if you're writing scripts in their final state will be quite narrow on the page visually in the speech bits. But I don't tend to do that up front. That is its own task. And I do tend to be a lot more sort of free and loose with it in the first draft stage, because I know that as soon as I like to go back and I like to tweak and I like to change things, if it's all beautifully formatted, I don't want to change things because I know that it's then going to need reformatting again. And it's such, I know that there's software that you can get that will automatically format these things for you, but I don't use it. So I should probably invest in these programs, but I haven't. That means that when I am formatting it, I am doing it manually and, making it all pretty. And I don't want to do that multiple times. Nobody's got time for that, I just write it, and then if we need it formatted, stick it in format then. And that's...
Yeah. And what about you, Rachel? Do you use any particular writing software?
No, I really like... Am I advertising if I say I really like Word? Am I going to get hate mail if I say I really like Word? Yes. Well, you say that. My partner hates it very, very deeply for his own reasons. I have many clients and many students at the university who love Scrivener, and I gave Scrivener a try, and I can absolutely see how useful it can potentially be. But the honest truth is I didn't want to put the time into getting as efficient with that as I feel with Word. And Word does everything I want it to do. I enjoy it. I know what I like in it. I know what works for me. I think it's really about whether you find it truly useful or truly enjoyable to spend that time. I mean, I've never been attracted to spending a lot of time learning a program. For some people, that's actually part of the fun, and that's completely wonderful. It just doesn't happen to be me. I think it's great these things exist. And another one that I get asked about sometimes is the ones where you speak into it and it appears there. Now, I've got a screenwriter friend who's heavily dyslexic. She does what she does through audio, speaking into it, and that's brilliant, and thank God it exists because it allows her to do what she needs to do. And somebody I used to work for years ago, I remember she injured her hand and couldn't physically use the keyboard or the pen for a while. She used the audio. I don't think it was necessarily what she'd have chosen, but, you know, as a short-term solution or one that you have to learn. It's wonderful these things exist. They just don't happen to be for me.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. And I guess it's, you know, anything that comes between you and your creativity is probably not a good thing.
The thing is, I think it's also about knowing when you're making a sacrifice for a greater good later on. It might be that I get to a point in my life where actually, when my current novel, please God, is in the world, maybe then I might think about it between projects. But right now I'm very deep in two things I care enormously about, and the last thing that I want to give myself is extra homework. I just want to be in that world, developing that world.
Yeah. I think there's a certain point where things become procrastination almost. And I know people who have started writing in one program, then relearned in another program and everything. And in the meantime, it's like, well, your book isn't getting any further towards being done, is it? And it's almost like they don't want to write it. They want to find the best way to write it. But it's like, but that's not the same as actually writing it.
Absolutely.
You know, people used to write with a pen and paper is the sort of theory that I've got. If someone could sit there with a notebook and write, you know, Dracula, then you can sit down with Word or with Google Docs and write your piece. You know, you don't need anything more fancy than that. And there is a point where I think getting to grips with tools becomes a sort of exercise in procrastination, just a high-tech one.
I guess for me it comes back to what we were saying about how to give and how to receive feedback. Software is the same. The more clear you are on what you want it to do, the more you're motivated by what you want it to do, and the less process driven you are, and the more result driven you are, the better for you and the better for it.
I guess my main thing is like, I just want to write the book.
Exactly.
If that's what your main be all and end all is.
Or even, I want to have written the book.
That's even better. That's even better.
Well, and I guess in first draft territory, productivity is the absolute key, isn't it? It's how do we get this vomit draft down onto paper or screen or whatever.
So we can break the metaphor and start moving all the bits around.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that I know is always problematic for writers is dialogue within prose. And I want to ask you both really about laying out dialogue. Are there rules that you follow, or have you invented a system for writing dialogue?
It's interesting.
I definitely haven't invented a system. It's a case of new character, new paragraph, whether that paragraph is one word, 2 words, or a lot of words. You stay with the person who's speaking, their actions, body language, the clues that you want to give your point of view character about what that person might be thinking. Go on that paragraph. We then move to the next person who's speaking. Let's say it's the viewpoint character. Then we might be sharing their private thoughts and feelings within that next to their dialogue. I haven't invented anything. I have just enjoyed how very clear it is when you know how it works and how psychologically accurate formatting is.
Yeah, things I've read, there are as many different ways of laying out dialogue as there are, I guess, editors. It's probably more an editor thing than it is or a typesetter or whatever.
Are we talking about things like not using speech marks and having a dash?
Yeah,
and things like that.
Or like where the character's name is in capitals, more like a script. Like in The Road.
Yeah, I've seen that before, yes.
Okay.
And, you've got boy,
man, boy,
and their dialogue follows. More like reading a script.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I think that adds to the mood of the book there, because it's like, it's very stark. And you're not really getting any internal thoughts around what's being said in the dialogue. It is very pared back. And that adds to the atmosphere that's being created in the story. And there I think it all complements. So I do think there are different things you can do with dialogue and sort of and how it's set out, but it really does depend on the book. I mean, like if I did that in anything Dex related, it would be really strange. But in The Road, it makes absolute sense.
Yes.
You know.
And I guess it's consistency through the novel as well, isn't it? You wouldn't start doing that at some point. Maybe there are examples of
people have done everything really at the end of the day. Someone's done it, whoever it is, whether it works or not is you know, I mean, people get away with more when they've been around a bit, and you know, people are going to buy their books anyway, so they get to be a bit more inventive and you know, all of these things. Most people will stick to a format, I think. That's pretty standard.
And reported speech is such great fun for when you want that distance, or you want that sense of remembering something in a distant way, or feeling removed from it. I was just thinking about Mrs. Dalloway actually, and how we begin in reported speech. We begin in this thoughtful, grateful / scared / desperate sort of lead up to a party. And we take in all of London. And when earlier in the series, when I was talking about Lisa Jewell and looking through bus windows and seeing how everybody's story is connected, it was kind of a bit like that sort of feeling, which I do so enjoy, where reported speech, what you see other people saying to each other, then in the next part you might go into that scene and see what the true story is of them and how wrong we get each other, and how we read our own fears and wishes onto other people. Dialogue styles can be wonderful for that. I love exploring that.
Yeah. And also layout. I mean, I've read novels where there are sections that are italicised because we are looking back at another point in history, or we are looking at something from the perspective of another character. And I think it's just done to make it more helpful that the italicised bits relate to this character in this time.
Yeah, there's got to be a visual sort of signal to the reader to help differentiate. And that comes from consistency. And you know, then the reader will get on board. Okay, when it's italicized, it's this. When it's not, it's that. That then helps the reader to fall into a sense of like of rhythm within the book itself. But I mean, like that kind of formatting choices. They're stylized, I guess, is the
And style will always reflect meaning, that when you find what works for you, it will be having a conversation with the meaning in some way. It will suit what you're trying to say and who you are trying to say it.
Well, it strikes me that for most writers, most books, there is a practicality to it. And the practicality is we want to make this as clear as possible for readers, ultimately.
Exactly.
So we move on, I think, to the world of self-publishing then, because if you are a published writer, someone is going to do all of this for you for your final print version. If you're self-published, you're going to be doing all of this yourself. And so, Emily, I want to kind of move on to you, because I think you probably chose the most difficult formatting job you could possibly have had in your Dex Legacy Season 1 script and commentary book. Do you want to just say a little bit about what the book was, and then we can go on to some of the formatting shenanigans?
So basically the book is all of the scripts from Season 1, plus commentary that sort of interjects and intertwines with it, talking about the making of the series and how it was done, and also information about the characters and how they sort of came about, and their relevant details that come into it, little extras and things. And so this book goes from sections of script to prose, to then sections of script to prose. The act of just doing that, laying out script is a whole formatting exercise in itself. Laying out script for publication through Amazon KDP is another exercise. Then working out how to do the prose bits. So I ended up having like a little in between. There's a word for it, isn't it? When you've got a little spacer that's a little
line break, or about something else.
Maybe it's so it's like a line break, like a
coda,
like a that goes in between. So basically between the bits of script and then the prose, there was just a little, like a wiggly bit.
Cedilla, is it? No, it's not Cedilla, is it? But
so it's like a visual break, basically. Like it it was a pulse line, because Dex Legacy is all about kids in labs and stuff. So there was this pulse line, and having to get all of that lined up, the script all lined up, then every single time there's a break, pulse line. Every time you, Chris, interjected bits as well. So I think your interjections are italicised and my comments aren't. So they all had to be consistent. The headers all had to be consistent. The titles of the script, so like episode 3, scene 1, you know, all of that had to be consistent. It was an absolute mare.
And this is 400 pages as well, isn't
like
it?
380 pages or something of this. And yeah, I think, because I tried it in various different ways before I landed on doing it in Word. If you're approaching this, just do it in Word and save yourself the repeated exercise that I went through, where it's heartbreaking because you get halfway through, you get to like page 200 of making something look nice, and then you're like, this isn't going to work. And then you got to start again. So yeah, I think I formatted the whole thing twice in 2 different formats. I can't remember what the first one was. I think I was too angry to remember. And I got to Word and did it there. And I think the rules are something like your inside margins have to be wider than your outside margins. And then whatever that distance is for every 100 pages, add an extra millimetre.
Blimey.
Because of the
amount of pages and like being able to read it. So you've got to know roughly how many pages your book is going to be, so that you can calculate how wide your margins need to be. I think it's always double spaced and no smaller than 11 font for it, really, for readability. And a good font that is free to use, because you don't want to get caught up in, you know, do I own this font? Am I able to print it?
That might be something that surprises our listeners, actually, that some fonts are, you know,
limited.
you have to pay for them.
Yeah, exactly, especially if you're selling something. And if the font is owned by the artist, or, you know, whatever, if it's not free access, then actually you could find yourself having to pay for it later.
So just then, to point our listeners in the right direction, would all of the fonts that are available readily in Word be free to use, do we think?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that, but I would say it's worth looking into just in case. Just always look into it. I used Roboto for mine, which I think was a language that was created for coding, actually, software development. And it was created as an open source font.
Yes.
So there was no problem with me using that. It was open from the beginning. So that made things very simple on the font front for my book. But yeah, you do just need to be careful of that. The same way you need to be careful if you're using a font on your front cover. Just make sure that you've got the right to use that font. Because you can't hide it on a front cover, let's face it.
No.
That's not the place to hide something.
No, exactly.
Well, we'll come back to, you know, script layout and all sorts of other things shortly. But Rachel, I mean, have you done any kind of laying out of something for publication?
I have done everything I could to ensure I didn't have to.
Wise.
What I wanted to do was concentrate on the writing, get as comfortable as I can with the fact that I am not a technical person. I don't enjoy that. I find that more admin-y and stressful. And there was a time when I thought you had to do it all yourself, whatever you were doing. And one year when I was running the Greening sponsored write for Macmillan Cancer Support that I do every year in memory of my friend, I'd worked up the courage to ask an editor who I'd worked with and who I knew did design really, really well if he could teach me this, that and the other. And he said, do you want me to teach you this, that and the other, or would you like me to do it for you? And I said, actually. And I realised that when you are working with the right people and you know yourself and you know what other people are good at and what other people enjoy, that's better. So that's Steve Shaw of Black Shuck Books and White Space Design. And I really enjoyed that experience. So when I then was going to self-publish something that I use with my students and my clients, which is your creative writing toolkit, I said, Steve, can we talk about this? And I asked him to do all of that side of things for me. And that was how I did not go mad.
Yeah,
I have balanced on the edge of madness a few too many times, I think, in my career.
Do you enjoy it a bit, though? I mean, is it interesting to you? Is it fun to you, that side of things? Like, if you really weren't enjoying that side of things, would you go elsewhere for it?
Yeah, see, this is the thing. Actually doing the formatting was really quite satisfying. Making sure I got it all right, making sure that it was done how I wanted it to be done. It was quite satisfying getting to that point. And now when I pick up the book and I look through it,
it's beautiful.
It's so
clean, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the word. Yeah.
And I think that if I'd got somebody else to do it, they might not have done it in quite the same way, or like you lose control. This is the thing. If you don't care about having control of that stuff, or you have zero opinions on that stuff, fine, somebody else can have at it. If you know what you want at the end of the day, it can be easier to just do it yourself.
But it's communication as well, isn't it?
It is,
if you've got somebody that you genuinely enjoy or working with already, or are curious to work with,
then that's different. I think it's all down to personal preference, personal choice, from personal point of view, whether or not you've got time. And I did not have time, but I took it on anyway. And then you get to a point where you're so far down that road that you're like, I can't turn off now. I can't. It's got to be. It's like, I've got to get to the end of this. It's got to be worth it. Then you realise you're like halfway into it, and you realise how deep the water goes, and you're like, oh no.
The other thing with freelance life in that is that it also opens up another door to you in your skill set, that you've now got that experience that could mean that somebody that you like who wants some help with that, you'd be the person for them if you chose to do that.
Since formatting a script book, I am confident that a novel would be very much easier. I think of the just formatting a novel with like, this must be so nice. And, like doing the script. I actually think as well, like my sort of lack of formatting early in the script writing process helped me when it came to doing the book, because it takes so much longer to unformat something to then format it differently. And there were bits of it where I formatted it too early and then ended up having to go back over and make sure it was all done. So much work. Just try, whatever you're doing, try really hard to only have to format once.
Yes.
Subscribe to The Writer's Gym by searching for us in your favourite podcast app and clicking follow, favourite or subscribe. I want to introduce something a little bit different into this conversation now, because we've talked up to this point about formatting for the printed page. But of course, a lot of writers now share their writing digitally online. Have you even considered how you would format something to be read on a screen? I mean, so we have ebooks, we have websites where we put writing. I mean, do you think about that in a different way, or? Being
completely honest,
get someone else to do it.
That falls into the things I don't enjoy doing, and I'm deeply happy and grateful it's somebody else's problem, to quote Douglas Adams. You know, when the sofa appears on Lord's cricket ground and no one can see it because it's within an SCP, within a somebody else's problem field. That is my goal. That is my go-to. I care how it looks, but the way I translate caring how it looks is to want it to be done well and to be utterly comfortable with the idea that that is not by me.
Yes.
I'm different. I do all my own.
Yeah, so you've got short stories on your...
On the website. I do my website writing and bits. I've got short stories on there. I've got blogs on there. I've also just been doing a narrative game. Interactive narrative, and that's interesting on a formatting basis, because you're getting people to the screens are sections of the story, and then there are choices, there are interactive elements in there, and you have to be mindful of things like, well, how much text is on the screen before you're giving people choices. You don't want to have a whole 3 paragraphs before the next choice. No, you want to have it a short paragraph. The reader has to feel like they're actively involved the whole time. So there have to be interactive elements coming in, and all of that, I guess, it comes into layout and formatting, because you're thinking, where do I put the buttons that they make most sense? You know, do these buttons stand out enough from those buttons?
Yes.
You know, is the sort of description here foreshadowing the options below to enough of an extent that the player is going to then know, is going to then be able to make an informed choice rather than just sort of like what is this? It's all sorts of things come into that then, and it's very interesting as a process. It's sort of gamifying layout.
Yeah.
And that's its whole
thing. We need to talk, I think, about game writing and branching narratives and all that sort of thing in a future podcast.
Absolutely,
But I guess what you're saying there, I think, is kind of what we've been saying, as a theme running through today, that clarity of layout, clarity of formatting is really important, isn't it?
Having worked in tech, I call it the UX, user experience.
Yeah.
There's a whole field of expertise in technology called UX, and people literally think the whole time, what is the user experience of this? Is it good UX? When a user looks at this screen, do they know what they're doing? Do they know what they're doing next, where it's going to lead? And sometimes I pick up a book and I think, well, the UX of this is terrible. And it's, that's a perfectly legit thing to think, that you're looking at something, you look at a website, you're like, well, where am I going next?
Yeah.
If it's just one single screen where you have to scroll for, and you get repetitive strain injury if you're on a mobile phone, that's, it's not good UX. So sometimes you've just got to think of it in terms of UX. If you're creating a book, you've got to think about the user experience.
Yeah. So a question, I'm going to come to you with this one, Rachel. Are you as a writer only as clear or good as your layout?
I would have to say UX all the way.
Yeah.
If your content has presence on screen, on the page, wherever it is, it's there for one purpose and one purpose only. That's to be read, that's to be experienced.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I do believe in formatting early, because you want to be as in charge of that and aware of that as you possibly can. So I'm not saying you're only as good as your formatting, but if you're there for the reader, if you're there to connect, and that, I'd argue, is why we're all everywhere, then that's how you do it in the end.
Just to follow up on that then, would you format for an alpha reader? I mean, you if you're doing it, Rachel, from the outset, the answer is always going to be yes.
For the same reason that I'd want my living room to be as tidy as possible before my friends were in it. Yes, I would.
We are in Rachel's living room now, listeners.
And believe it or not, this is as tidy as possible. And it's a good comparison, actually, because I wouldn't want my personality to go away. I wouldn't want to be so tidy that you lose who you are. What I want is for that alpha reader to know that they are absolutely valued, because if you don't value your alpha reader, who the heck do you value? You've gone to that person for a reason. So I want them to have as happy, as good a reader experience as they possibly can. I feel like the opposite, it may be different for other people, but I'd feel like the opposite was sort of taking them for granted a bit, that it's that thing where if you have a conversation with somebody about their writing and they say, oh yeah, you find that out later, or something like that, but what you've actually offered them is a question that you had as a reader then. That's not something to say, oh, you'll find out later. It's to say, thank you for telling me you needed that then and you didn't have it. I need to have a think about that. I want to do everything I can to welcome my reader to the page, or what's the point?
Yeah. What about you, Emily? I mean, I've probably beta read.
You've beta read
rather than alpha read, but it was all nicely formatted.
It was all right. Yeah, no, the first book that I wrote, The Blood Road, the first in the trilogy, I wrote that on my iPad, and it was one continuous document. And I didn't have chapter headings. I just had little asterisks before I changed perspectives. It was one long document. An exciting phase of that happened later on in the writing process, when I took a step backwards and realised that these asterisks aligned where chapters were going to be.
Yes.
And I started putting the chapters in. That then started bringing it about into the form of a book. I didn't send it out until I had worked out what those chapters were and where they were. And you have your hand up.
Rachel wants to come in here, listeners.
I think that's what we were told to do, right?
Yeah.
I just had a thought, which is something that might come into that, is my first draft will often be by hand. not exclusively, but my iPad is my notebook. So
okay.
before I'm formatting something, I'd say there's about a 70% chance to 80% chance that when it's on the screen, that's not the first time I've created it. So maybe that comes into it too, that my iPad scrolliness happens in a notebook, sometimes in the notebook of my phone or whatever I have at the time.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if that comes into it, that what you're describing, I guess I'm sort of seeing as a pre-first draft is notes as they come into the world. Maybe that comes into it. I don't know.
Maybe, because that's a whole different thing, isn't it?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the drafting, do we handwrite, do we speak into our phone and all that sort of thing. I think maybe that's another podcast, isn't it? But it's useful to know that...
There is a comparison though, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because me saying I format immediately is maybe not acknowledging that there's something that happens before that.
Yes.
Same as you were writing on your iPad one document.
Yeah.
I was doing that in a notebook before it arrives on a actual thing that will be a book.
But this is why it's so interesting to talk about it, because these are things that we do without even thinking about it.
Yes.
And then we go and have these conversations with other writers and it's like, oh yeah, but that's actually a thing.
Yeah.
And also the things that you do that you dismiss as part of the writing process. You just think, oh, well, that's a thing that I do. And then I write.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, all of it's writing.
Yes.
It's just how you're doing it. Like whether you're putting notes down in an email, whether you're writing something in notes or in a notepad, and then you go and you do the writing up and the editing of it wherever it's going to end up in your document. It's all part of the writing process, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, something that isn't strictly part of writing but is very much part of formatting, Emily, is if you are self-publishing, your cover artwork and your cover design, your cover layout.
Yes.
And I know this is something you grappled with quite a lot for the Dex Legacy Season 1 script and commentary book.
Yes.
Do you want to just, 101 cover layout design?
Yes. Okay. So I did get a friend of mine. I'm very lucky to have a incredibly talented friend who I met at work. She's a designer, and she did the design for my book. Now, absolutely beautiful design. One thing that I would say, anyone looking to self-publish, do yourself a favour, straight up. Have a continuous image that wraps around onto your back cover. Don't do the thing where you have a solid block cover for your spine and then a front cover image and a back cover image. Because if you are printing, by yourself, you have a lot more then to line up and make sure is aligned during the printing process. And when you've got a block colour on your spine, it's very obvious when that isn't lining up. Whereas if you've got a wraparound image, if it's slightly off, you can really get away with it. It's fine. You will save yourself a headache and a half if you do that for yourself. I learned this the hard way. I think for the second book in the series, I'm going to say to Vicky, my designer, I'm just going to say, you know what? Let's make something just wraps around and doesn't do that, because, it was a bit of a pain in the neck. And obviously the width of the spine cover changed if the number of pages changed. And it was all quite, getting formatting on covers on Amazon when you're doing it yourself is a whole thing.
There's things that you never thought were things that you will have to learn about.
Exactly. You see books from publishers that have all of these fancy spines that are completely different. It's like, they have whole departments for that. If you're working on your own, do yourself a favour, wrap around image.
And in printing, we always we hear about things like bleed and things like that. Are you able to explain that?
Yeah, so basically bleed is about similar thing. If your book has a different number of pages, or if it's a thing, if something is off on it, you don't want your front cover to then only have enough to cover the front cover, because then if something shifts, you're going to end up with a white line on the edge of your book, and that is very obvious. And that's why bleed exists, because then you've always got enough image around that if something happens in the printing process, it's not going to leave an ugly white line somewhere. And that's what you want. If you don't want ugly white edges to be visible.
And who does?
And who does? always work to the bleed. But always definitely download the guidelines, the size guides before you even start with your cover design. Always do that. Start with the framework in mind and think about what your cover needs to do, and also the technical execution of it at the same time. It is a piece of work even of itself.
And that template layout, and that's available from the Rainforest site where your book's on sale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where you can find it, listeners.
Yeah. In the rainforest.
In the rainforest.
In the rain.
That's as close as we will go to the name.
Large river in South America.
I think I've said it multiple times. We do not need to advertise that site anymore today.
No.
Or fund any more space exploration for a certain individual who we won't mention anymore.
Absolutely no clues here.
Closing remarks then on format, layout. Are there any, or have we exhausted the topic?
For me, it's all about what's the I dare you. Whatever you're comfortable with may be working for you really, really well, but the occasional I dare you allows you to just go, what the hell, and check. So my I dare you writing exercise on layout is, what don't I normally think about early, and what would happen if I do? And just try it out. Nobody's going to make you do it forever. If you hate it, you'd never have to do it again. But what if? What if is great because it allows you to do it without thinking, what does this say about me? What does this, that and the other? Just lets you go, curiosity.
Yeah.
Emily, anything from you as a final remark?
No, but what I think I might do as an exercise is look up a form of dialogue formatting and try writing a scene with that different formatting and see what that does to the tone of the overall piece. Sometimes what I do is I write a scene and then I will try and write that same scene in different ways, trying out different formats and layouts of dialogue and how that affects suddenly, like, does this introduction to this dialogue section feel completely out of place when the dialogue then goes into this format that is completely different. Yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see how that goes.
Oh, well, feedback on those experiments in a future podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel and Emily, thank you very much, and happy laying out, and hope we've given you some good tips from today.
Wow, that sounds like a totally different genre of podcast.
Laying out.
Tips on,
Maybe not.
I don't want to oversell ourselves here.
And we'll be fading.
That wasn't just me, that was a sex joke. You know, that was laying out.
Laying out,
End comment. That was not just happening in my brain.
No,
that was not.
laying out.
Good. Are you still recording?
I have.
Thought you might be.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Writer's Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writer's Gym, please go to rachel.knightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writer's Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.